job is not to ask Emily questions, but to ask you questions. So we've thought about what we learned in the outline of the study and have framed some questions for discussion and hope they inspire you to have a discussion. So let's start out by saying this. The report indicates that job growth doesn't always translate into income growth. In fact, job growth in many metros is instead associated with higher income inequality and poverty and crime, maybe the most challenging result of this research. So why do you think that is so? Why do you think that job growth doesn't always translate into income growth, and in fact, job growth is associated with polarization and more poverty in the community? John?
There's underemployment. A lot of the jobs are temporary, low skill, low wage.
Okay. Anybody see that, or see a different factor at work in why job growth doesn't always lead to income growth or overall wealth for a community?
Some jobs simply pay minimum wage. And also the applicant doesn't have any skill or training perhaps beyond minimum wage. So
Is that a trend that's more recent?
that's a gut feeling. I have no.
Well, that's what this is about, is to share thoughts.
And so if you have a population in any community that has low education level, even though the parts of the community may be rising in education, you still have them as part of your populace. So they still contribute to these numbers. And so if jobs come along that pay minimum wage and they're willing to accept those jobs, they're willing to be viable applicants for those jobs, yes, they have jobs. Unemployment would drop. But the income level is not that great. But I also have a question, because the question is, can job growth see still low income level? And I want to reverse that a little bit, because I think we have a little bit of a phenomenon, even in the presentation, that we need to be aware of. Can wealth translate into no job growth? And my example of that is that, we have heard in Carroll County that there's a tremendous amount of new wealth because of oil and gas. I'm not sure a lot of those people that have signed land leases or sold property or mineral rights are hiring people. I mean, they're receiving, so the Carroll County, this is making any sense, the Carroll County per capita income may rise. Actually, I've heard somewhere that it's gone almost a stellar to the top, which may have a reflection on some of those 2010 and beyond figures for our particular area. So more maybe an answer to, or a comment to your first and also a thought to it.
Mike, you had a thought?
I thought oftentimes when we see a quick bump, we connect it to stimulus or short-term programs. And I can speak to schools where certain programs would come into your flow, your revenue stream for a short period of time, a biennial budget per se, and then it would be removed. So if you didn't take that on as a company, as part of your accepted culture, and then your investment, that wasn't going to sustain itself. So you could have an uptick in a particular data set, and then over a period of time actually see less, because if you didn't keep it, you had then perhaps to lay people off or reduce your force. So what was in play there would be something that would be government-oriented stimulus or something short-term that's an infusion that would probably skew those at different times depending on what the data.
Well, taking education as an example, how successful have the school districts been in trying to sustain some of those programs that were started with a stimulus bump or a funding bump.
It was always very intentional to be careful what programs you would actually connect your district to. If it was reading or something that was core-minded, knowing that it was going to sustain itself over time and it was going to be a part of your competencies, you stayed with your investment. If it was something that was perhaps a quick pass-through, you would put arm's length with that because you knew you couldn't sustain it. Oftentimes you leave a grant pass because it didn't connect culturally or deeply enough, or some of those dollars you were careful of even signing on for in the beginning.
I'm just curious, how do you find job growth? Is it all jobs, is it part-time jobs, full-time jobs, independent contractors, or all the above? Because it makes a difference as to what categories you're talking about as far as jobs increase. If your wages are becoming lower, obviously it seems like you're having more part-timers than you are full-timers. So full-time jobs with benefits, et cetera, tend to be a lot higher. So how is that measured? How are jobs measured?
Is there an answer in the studies, Diona, as to
Yeah,
what was
there's
covered?
no, I think it's a really good point. There's no difference between part-time and full-time jobs.
Okay,
So I think you are on to an important
okay.
issue.
Mary, comment from Mary?
Yeah, I got two ideas on this one, and kind of following what our president from the chamber had commented on in reference to education.
Denny.
Everybody knows, if I say Denny, they know. Denny Saunier from the one thing, an example of that in Canton, we have a large population, large percentage of our population that has little to no education beyond high school. Very large percentage. They don't have a lot of skills. We brought in a company called VXI Global Solution, many of you are aware of that. They've hired over 1,000 people in the last 2 years. So we've taken 1,000 people, and these are jobs that are making 10, 12 bucks an hour. So you got 1,000 families now that have increased their income up to that salary level that were making nothing or perhaps on welfare. And that's improved our situation for those families. But when you take those $12 an hour jobs now and you average them with the other jobs that were out there, you're lowering the average earnings for our community because there was no average before that. So this is an example where you've improved our community by bringing in some low-paying jobs, but you've lowered our average. The more people are working, but the average has gone down. And that's a perfect example in inner city areas where you have large populations of people that don't have a lot of skills. And when you get those types of jobs, Walmart comes in and brings in 300 jobs, those types of things, you are improving the community, but you're lowering the average. That's one example. The other example that I'd like to point out is when I looked at that map, it went through pretty quickly, so I may not be exactly the same, but it appeared to me that in those areas where you increased a lot of jobs, in those cities or metro areas where job growth was high, those were typically in southern states. They were right-to-work states. And those were states that a tempting company that might be paying 20 or 25 bucks an hour for labor for their factories, that open up a factory down there might pay 10 or 12 bucks an hour. And so what's happening is you've got a lot of companies that have moved south, which we've all seen that trend, into areas where they don't have to pay union wages, and so now they're working for less. That's lowering the wage as well while job growth is going up. So look at those cities in the south. My guess is that's the impact on them. The inner city areas like ours, it's a reverse because as we create jobs, they're low paying jobs. So those are two indicators that would make that trend, in both cases, increase jobs while slowing the average.
Ed Jarris from Cuyahoga County. I heard an interesting statistic. It was kind of shocking to me, but it was also instructive and it was accurate. This was at a conference from a fellow from the Brookings Institute. We were talking about B&M Steel down in Youngstown, which is a boon to that economy. But he says even at full capacity, that plant would probably employ about 700 people, whereas in the 70s, that plant at full capacity might employ 20,000 people. So what you have is with automation, even the good jobs, the good union jobs, are far less than they were in the past. So now you have 19,000 people who might have been employed in the 1970s who were without jobs, and then I think it goes to the mayor's point, which is it's any port in the storm for the civic leaders who are looking for any jobs for folks to get, so it's more attractive to bring in a low-paying company or a retail store or a phone banks or whatever to give these jobs to the folks because the automation has taken away a lot of the opportunities that previously existed.
Yes, sir.
I think you can't ignore the fact that most companies have been aware for the last 20, 30 years that the demographics of not only the country but Ohio are changing, and that ultimately is going to be a labor shortage. So you substitute technology for human resource, and in that conversion, you lose per capita income. So that's one point. Second thing is, in Ohio, we need to look at the fact that we've got largely mature industries, which means by business less profit margin, which means you constantly look for ways to reduce your cost. But that's countered by, and you also have to have programs that deal with new product development and innovation in that, which I think your study recognizes. That's the answer to that, is to get companies onto new products and services. So I think you're seeing a transition in Ohio from the past to the new, and hopefully that trend line starts going up over the last now and through the next 10 years, 20 years, because we're changing.
I wonder, one of the things that was an aha for us is that we've always thought about, let's pursue both jobs and incomes. And, we had the goals, jobs and incomes, jobs and incomes. And this is, I think, helping us see that it's a little more nuanced than that. And I agree with the mayor's point, and Ed's point, and so forth, that a job is better than no job, but not all jobs are created equal. And if we use as the fund in our work, but then I don't know what is appropriate here, what is the overarching goal? And it may increasingly be for us this idea of incomes. And then we think about, well, what's associated with that? And it builds on the point you just made, Steve, that means that we need innovation. That means we need investment in places. That means we need investment in education and educational attainment. And the common theme in all that is it does mean we need investment. Whereas policies that really are just promoting jobs, jobs, jobs might skew you towards minimizing public and private investment in order to have a climate that has the lowest possible costs.
We've said from Stark County's perspective for years with our legislators, while jobs tends to be the measure, jobs go up and down based on the economy. The root of building the economy is building wealth and building investment, so we agree exactly.
And this gets really real when we start thinking about things that are happening in states, regional, and so forth, about whether we will extend the Ohio Capital Fund to invest in entrepreneurs, whether we will renew the third frontier in another 2 years' time, what we will do with investment technology tax credits. So it's not just an abstract conversation.
Dr. King.
But if you don't bring in, I obviously, I don't think anybody will disagree with that type of thing. But there's still a reality. And this goes back to what the mayor said. And what I was trying to portray in my first comment, that you still have a large section, many times, of your population that don't have skills for training. And yes, if you can have those people employed, they're going to be employed on way down on the wage scale. But what is the alternative to that? And then when they are employed, they go into the numbers. And it's going to pull that, pull some of those comparables down. But you still have to deal with that in a community, or else it just continues to cost your community more in services and support. So, I think we need to, and education, in the early part of the presentation, I don't know if I misinterpreted this or not, but it seemed like education didn't have a link to jobs. And I struggle with that.
It's not that it's not positively or negatively associated with it.
I still struggle.
So, okay.
But the educational attainment is most strongly correlated with the growth of per capita income. So it is essential investment for long-term better economic growth. performance.
Dr. King, next.
Yeah, David King, London University. One of the questions that comes to mind behind the question of job growth and wealth on one hand and polarization on the other, Emily, this may be a question for you. We didn't stay very long on the 55 variables, which is very understandable. But the question that I would broadly describe as community engagement, what does that look like in these metropolitan areas? Things like the frequency with which a school levy passes. Is there a thriving arts community? Is there a kind of a regional identity? The kind of things that stimulate not just engagement in that region, but also investment in that region, which seems to me is one of the kinds of things, which again has a number of measures to it, that helps to ameliorate this dynamic between job growth and polarization. So I'm wondering if within that, there are some aspects of the research that get to those kinds of things that could be suggested to indicate community engagement in kind of a broad.
Yeah, there was some discussion of it. I think there were a couple of variables that fell out of the factor group. They just didn't group together well in the metro sample. We did things like arts occupation. So that was grouped with education and innovation, which is very highly correlated with all those things, not necessarily job growth, but yes, with GMP, yes, per capita income. But I think that's a great point, and I think that we do have some indicators, but they fell off. Yeah.
I was in this room a couple of days ago to talk about shale and the gas and oil boom and what that meant for our regional economy. And there was one phrase that was uttered by one of the panelists that I think is highly relevant to this conversation, and what I think that this approach, this research approach, leads us to. The speaker talked about how we try to separate out the fleeting and focus on the enduring. What's the short term, the noise that keeps us from getting to the stuff that really is the most important and the highest order for investment, for time? And to my way of thinking, we need to be able to work on multiple levels and multitask. There's an inherent good to attracting a company that will hire individuals who otherwise are not employed. That's a better situation than them not being employed. But at the same time, we collectively need to be focused on what kinds of investments we collectively can make that have the long-term implications for an enduring and resilient economy. So the kinds of notions about education and the kinds of things about finding ideas that can be commercialized from which we can create companies. How can we use that, foster the notions of entrepreneurship that, who thought ball bearings at some point were going to be anything? There was some garage tinkering that went on in the, 1880s that led to, a very robust economy in the last century in this place. That kind of, how do we capture those kinds of things that can have really long-term projection? And I think while this does not get us to the weeds of the specifics, it gives us guidance on how to flesh out the long-term thrust that can be applied both regionally and locally that knit up to a regional resilience that we strive for.
Something that I think also needs to be considered, and it would be interesting, I believe your study would have shown this or found this, but in communities, regions that have excelled, what is the cooperative level within those communities? Is everybody kind of in a sub-region? Yeah, let's call this MSA a sub-region. So it's within Stark County we have Canton, Alliance, Massillon. Then you have townships, and North Canton. What is, in the successful communities, the ability to work collaboratively within those areas and all move to a same strategy,
Right.
instead of everybody having their own independent, selfish strategies? Where is the leadership on that? Where is the community leadership, the elected leadership, the business leadership? And the feeling that they're all part of one community.
just real quickly, I wanted to say like this in the community engagement piece, there are data that get at some of that, governmental units per 1,000 population, for example, and it's all public, it's on the website. But I think that is a perfect example, like Bob said, there is so much room, this is just laying the platform for all these much more rich, deeper conversations. And that's one of them, is what are the communities that have done well and what are the component pieces of their performance? So that's one area where we do hope to dive a little deeper.
And I have to jump on that just a little bit, only because I'm aware this is separate from this research, but my Federal Reserve colleagues in Boston and Philadelphia done some work looking at declining older industrial cities and did some case studies, Springfield, Massachusetts, Reading, Pennsylvania, those places. And out of that work came leadership and collaboration were the two primary, most important factors for either slowing the decline of the older industrial city or holding its level. And none of the cities through the recession actually, sprang back to life, but it was an important factor. The other conclusion that came out of that at a high level was that leadership can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be elected officials. It doesn't have to be anchor institutions, which is always thought of, that they have to come together. But this research showed that the community needs to come together. Someone needs to take leadership, and then that's the first step in stabilizing the decline in some of these older industrial cities as jobs have left, have people out-migrated, all of those factors. So that work has been done in the system, and I think that's why we're trying to work with the fund on this, because that result of leadership is really important.
When I came into the room today, I saw Adrienne O'Neill, and I was brought back to a trip that she and I took a couple of years ago to the Puget Sound region, to Seattle, Tacoma area, that was in fact organized by a couple of the folks that organized today's event, Terry Ewell and Chris Thompson in particular. And I was marveling at how that region, which is a very robust region, had a table that was large enough and was sophisticated enough to work on a regional scale all around Puget Sound, but still had enough give so that the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce in Tacoma could work diligently on stuff that was uniquely Tacoma. And yet at the same time, the folks from Seattle and Everett and the Vashon Island and Tacoma could work together and sort of work and strategize on how to make sure that when Boeing's headquarters went to Chicago, they could still retain the driver of their economy, which was the production of aeronautics stuff at Boeing. They still were able to figure out the strategy to do what was most important for the region as a whole. So there was this unique sort of what's Canton, what's Cleveland, what's Akron, what's Lorain, what's Doylestown, and yet at the same time figure out a table that could rise to regional significance. We've been at this for 10 years and deeply value what the Stark Community Foundation and the Sisters of Charity bring to our collaboration, but we're still groping with how to do stuff on a regional level that's significant and yet fully capture the value of a robust local set of civic interventions to make a place work economically as it ties up to the region. This is really complicated stuff. And so hopefully today's offering of data and of insights that we've used effectively to allocate the $70-some million that we've been able to aggregate over the last decade can also be useful to you potentially as you, as a community, decide these kinds of matters and how they might tie up to the region.